My name is Tanya, and I work for the Canadian Institute for the Relief of Pain and Disability, and we're very excited to have you here for our third webinar in our series that we're doing right now. This one is Utilizing Science, Technology, and the Arts to Transform Pain with Diane Gromala, which we're very excited to have her today as well. Just a note that this webinar is co-sponsored by Pain BC, and it was also made possible through the support of a direct access program through the BC government. And a few technical points for everyone on the line. You should be able to hear the presentation through your computer speakers or through the conference call line if you dialed in. And please feel free to use the question boxes to submit any questions you have or if you're having technical difficulties. We'll collect the questions at the end of the presentation and have Linda go through them one by one. Unless there's anything really pertinent, then we'll do it during the presentation. And we'll also have a few interactive polls throughout the presentation, so we'd love your participation in those as well. And then after the webinar's finished, we'll be recording the whole session and we'll post it on our website afterwards. And so you'll be able to view it for free. And we'll also be collecting any links that she talks about or any unanswered questions into a blog post as well, so that you can look forward to both of those. As I mentioned, I'm Tanya and I'll be moderating. Today we also have Anne Gillespie, who works for the Canadian Institute as well, and she is going to be helping with all of the question and answer. And then our presenter today is Diane Gromala, and she is the Canada Research Chair and Professor in the School of Interactive Art and Technology at Simon Fraser University. Her virtual reality work is used in over 20 clinics and hospitals worldwide and is supported by research grants from Canada's Networks for Centers of Excellence, CIHR, SSHRC, and the American National Science Foundation. She is the founding director of Transforming Pain Research Group, which is an interdisciplinary team of physicians, computer scientists, artists, designers, and neuroscientists, and a psychophysicist who are investigating how new technologies can be used to address the many facets of chronic pain. It's really, really exciting to have her here today. Her knowledge and expertise is wonderful. I will hand it over to Diane. Here you are, Diane.
Thanks, Tanya, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'll be talking today about collaborations between scientists, physicians, and artists to create technologies that we hope will help people with chronic pain. I'm a professor and researcher at Simon Fraser University, and I've also had chronic pain for the last 25 years, which I guess makes this my silver anniversary. That's some dark humor there. Most people know me like this, but the reality of my situation, I hope you can see this, is that's me in bed. I do a lot of my work from there. It's a difficult thing to do, but somehow I managed to, and I founded and direct the Transforming Pain Research Group. So it's a group of many people. You see their names listed here. They're physicians, scientists of many sorts, and artists and designers. They're both experts and graduate students who are in training, and partners and a hospital, Vancouver General Hospital, and a philanthropist. So this is the different disciplines that they represent. And that's what some of them look like. So we work together to create technologies that are useful to real people who have long-term complex problems with pain. I think it's important that it's not just technology that comes from technologists who might not have a deep understanding of the medical, psychological issues that attend chronic pain, and that it doesn't come from one area. I think the arts are very important so that it's as interesting, imaginative, and people-friendly as possible. So chronic pain, first of all, the bad news, we don't know what causes it, and we don't yet have a cure. The healthcare providers are at the forefront of helping, though, and because we don't have a cure, they stress managing pain. So what my group does is develop technologies that we hope can help people manage their long-term pain. And that ranges from technologies that are useful for physicians to patients. And long-term pain has many related difficulties, such as these depression, anxiety, pain catastrophizing, insomnia, and so forth. Kinesiophobia is the fear of moving. I like to think of it as, because I have that myself, is kind of a reluctance to move because one never knows if the result of trying to get exercise will mean that you'll be in bed for 2 weeks or that you'll actually feel better. So when I meet new people and I tell them I have chronic pain, I inevitably hear, have you tried all of these things? And the answer is, yes, I have. Over 25 years, I've tried just about everything. And so managing chronic pain can be overwhelming, as you can see from that list. That's why I helped hear Dr. Pam Squire, who will also be talking later on in the series, Dr. Owen Williamson, Dr. Brenda Lau, and Neil Pearson to develop this toolbox for solutions to pain, because there's so many things that actually are helpful, but it's hard to know where to start and what path to take through these many things that one can do to help. So what we focus on are the two down at the bottom, which is exercise and moving, also breathing and meditation. So what kinds of non-invasive technologies can we develop that will help? I use the term non-invasive technologies because we don't deal with biotechnologies like implantable devices that deliver drugs or stimulate spinal cords. We just deal with technologies that are related to computers that might seem familiar to you. One of the existing technologies is actually as simple as a mirror. So Dr. Ramachandran uses a mirror for people who have phantom limb pain, and he found that the way we map sensations in our bodies gets messed up when you're missing a limb, but when he uses the technology of a simple mirror, then that body map gets reinvigorated and some of the pain goes away, at least for 6 months or so. So the three technologies I'll talk about today are immersive virtual reality, robotics, and social media. So immersive virtual reality, what is that? What do I mean by that? It's three-dimensional, stereoscopic, interactive computer graphics, interactive audio, and it's real-time. So you can see here the picture on the left. You wear what's basically two very tiny televisions in front of your eyes in stereo, so you can see things in 3D. You can also hear sound in 3D, so you can design it so you hear something like a bird chirping in a specific area, and it sounds very immersive. So instead of the basic difference between this technology and others is that, let's say video games, instead of just looking at a screen, a computer screen, you actually feel like you're in that simulation itself. And you can see here that it was developed for those situations where the cost of human life and machines is too extreme to bet on, and so the training takes place in virtual reality, and there's so many tight connections between our perceptual processes and the simulation that practicing in a simulation like this is extremely helpful for pilots who are flying their first, let's say, fighter jet, for example. And there are many things that the computer senses from where you're looking, where your head is moving, how you're moving your hands. and so forth. So there's a one-to-one simulation of your body that mirrors your movements in VR. You might have heard the term avatar. You can see on the left here that someone's holding their hand with a glove on it. And what they're seeing is their hand moving exactly in sync with that glove in the computed space. So the person in the wheelchair here, for example, even though they no longer can walk, their avatar can walk in the simulation, and so they, in a sense, feel as though they're walking too. And we know from research that there are a certain number of what are called mirror neurons that also get fired, and in a sense are the same ones that are the ones that we'd use if we could walk. They're not all of the ones we could use, but a subset of the ones we use when we can walk. So the experience can be very, very compelling. And it's used in many different kinds of healthcare applications, from surgical training to anxiety disorders and phobias, post-traumatic stress disorder, and so on. So why virtual reality? Well, first of all, we know from the last 10 years of research that it's extremely effective in helping people who have acute pain or short-term pain that's expected to go away once their wound's healed. In this case, it's people who have third-degree burns. So when their dressing gets changed and their wound abraded or scrubbed, that's a very painful, as you can imagine, situation. So during that time, what they're seeing is a very cold world. You can see on the left, it's an ice cave with water flowing through, and the snowmen and the penguins and animals interact with the user while their painful medical procedure is happening. And the findings are that it can reduce the use of, or the need for, opioids by half. And that's really amazing to me. It blows my mind that a media form can be really effective, almost as effective as something like an opioid or narcotic. The medicine that humans have been using for the past 5,000 years, we think. A media form can be something that compelling and that effective that it can reduce pain, and the need for opioids, I think, is really interesting. Also, they've done fMRI studies to show those parts of the brain that are active when we have pain. There are very few, if any, biomarkers for pain, which makes it both a very difficult thing to study, but also a very fascinating one. One of those biomarkers is blood flow in our brain when we're having pain, and they found that with virtual reality, it reduces those areas of our brain that we use when we have pain. So because of this kind of effectiveness, VR is accepted as a non-pharmacological analgesic for short-term pain. So how and why does it work? We don't know is the real answer, but we think that it's an especially good form of pain distraction. That means it takes up so much of our attentional resources and directs our attention away from our pain that it's actually an analgesic or pain reducer. So, okay, you might be saying that's good for acute pain, but surely you're not suggesting that people who have chronic pain distract themselves 18 hours a day, right? Of course. So what we've developed, we've had to go down a different path and invent a different paradigm or a different model based on two things that we know work over the long term: biofeedback and mindfulness meditation. Both of those have been studied extensively, and both of them are known to be effective for reducing chronic pain, or at least helping people manage their levels of chronic pain over time. So our goal here is we combine immersive virtual reality with biofeedback, and we do that to train people in mindfulness meditation. And our goal is for people to better manage their pain. After they use the virtual reality, we're developing applications so they can use it at home and continue their mindfulness meditation at home. we hope that that will increase both motivation, and we can track how often people use it. Okay, so this is an example of virtual reality. You see here the user's wearing a head-mounted display, so he's seeing a forest as he's walking. On his fingers those are the biofeedback sensors. So they're picking up his breath rate and his galvanic skin response, which is basically our skin is our body's mood ring, and his heart rate. So as those biological states change, they change the 3D visuals that he's seeing and the sounds that he's hearing in real time, or second to second. There's really minute changes are being picked up by the computer and changing the environment he sees. So another example of that is here. The top picture is a world that looks very foggy, and as you're walking through this forest and you're reducing your stress levels, the world becomes clearer and the fog dissipates at the bottom there. So how does this work? We hypothesized that VR and biofeedback might enhance mindfulness meditation training because the feedback lets you know if you're actually changing your physiological states as they happen, moment to moment. So of course you don't need technology to meditate. But we think because you get initial feedback moment to moment, you get a good sense of if you're actually making any change or progressing, and that helps. And we know from studying over 500 people that it does help, especially people who have never meditated before. We also think that VR and biofeedback might help because it engages perception and our senses in very tight feedback loops. So not just visuals, not just auditory, but many, many kinds of senses. And it may then increase the pain threshold. So our ability to, how we sense pain and how much pain we can tolerate might actually increase. And the goal overall is that we know what is learned in VR persists. So for example, fighter pilots who are trained in VR, that kind of learning persists. And once mindfulness meditation is learned, we think VR may no longer be necessary. So like dentistry, it's our goal that virtual reality after a few training sessions won't be necessary. It's an expensive technology. It's getting less expensive, but it's still access is a problem. So you might be thinking now, okay, so how does your chronic pain inform your research? One example is, I know I need to be physically active. We all do, but of course it's not that simple, especially when you have chronic pain. You may have difficulty becoming active. You may not know what's going to happen when you try to exercise and be physically active regularly. And because chronic pain can sometimes be not knowable, we don't know is it going to get worse over time, how much worse. It's easy to think of or catastrophize the worst situations you can. So that led me to design this project here. Those abstract trees become more realistic. And also, I know that biofeedback will help, and I know meditating will help. But even though I know these things doesn't actually mean I'm going to do it, because it's hard to, and it's hard to do it regularly. So, and especially when I start to meditate, the pain that I've managed to put in the background of my attention, I don't know about you, but it starts to scream. So I developed this with my grad students and colleagues, a sitting form of meditation for particularly that reason. So as you travel in this virtual environment, a vocal coach helps guide you through mindfulness meditation techniques. And I think what's happening here, and the reason that it helps me to meditate and to get over that initial reluctance to do so because I know my pain's going to be in the forefront of my attention is that being in this kind of environment and coming to a cave where I can meditate and not pay attention to this world we're seeing here, there's just enough attention that's slightly directed outward that's helping me get over that initial sense that, you know, the pain's really coming into the forefront of my attention and I don't want to deal with it. So that's what I think. And finally, another virtual environment we've created is a version where the user sits in a hammock chair and is suspended. It has a very nice rocking motion, which I also think helps. And they hear different kinds of music as they focus on their breathing. And again, they're hooked up to a biofeedback device. And they compose spatialized sounds by taking a long, deep breath when they hear a sound they like. It's basically the way they capture a sound is by taking a long, deep breath and holding it. For those geeks of you out there, this is how it works. And the music that they create circles around them like a home theater system and goes upwards. That's part of a yoga practice, both the breathing and the way the sound circles and goes upwards. And that's going to be at TED Active this spring in 2012. So in these virtual reality projects, users in essence become aware of their inner states by externalizing their biofeedback data. It's almost as if you could take a mirror to your inner states and see what's going on. And the biofeedback data changes the visual and sonic environments that users feel they're within. Those simulations, they feel like they're navigating through change constantly according to their inner states. So prior and current studies suggest that this is a very effective form of feedback, especially for those who don't regularly meditate. So we're testing these projects now in hospitals and doctors' clinics, starting in Vancouver and moving to Toronto, and hopefully in northern BC. Users have 6 sessions in those places, and then they can use our software on their home computers, smartphones, and iPads. So the idea is that they go to their hospitals and doctor clinics, and while they're there seeing their healthcare providers, instead of having to come back for another appointment, they can do their sessions there and then continue those at home. And my plan is that as virtual reality becomes less expensive, we plan to design systems that people can use at home. So eventually we hope that it becomes inexpensive enough to use at home. And with the technologies like 3D movies and things, I think the signs are pretty clear that it will become less expensive pretty quickly. If anyone is interested in how we test the validity of this idea, we use the Visual Analog Scale, VAS, a questionnaire, and DNIC, which is, you've probably seen this on science shows where people put their hand in a bucket of ice and they see how long they can keep it there. That's a way to measure pain tolerance because in North America we don't hook people up to machines that inflict pain. We have ethical problems with that, although in other countries we can. So we measure that before and after users have been in the virtual environment. So that's virtual reality. The other 2 technologies that I wanted to briefly discuss are robotics and social media. And for robotics, this is a haptic creature. Haptic refers to touch, and it's a prototype developed at UBC's Professor Karen McLean's Spin Lab. It looks like a a stuffed animal that's not quite a cat or a rabbit, but kind of both. The wires are contained in the tail, you see there. And the way this works is, just like the virtual reality is combined with biofeedback, this robot is combined with biofeedback. And it's been tested to reduce anxiety in young teens. It's warm and it purrs when you pet it, so it's more than just a stuffed animal. It's actually a robot. So what happens is, this is my grad student Mihei on the right. So she has a band you see across the top of her chest that measures her breathing. So as she breathes, so does the robot, and as her heart beats, so does the robot's heart. And when she pets it, it starts to purr. So like the virtual reality projects, this is another way of exteriorizing or making visible or helping people become aware of their inner states. And in this case, it's kind of let's call it a way to comfort oneself. It's working on the same principles as when we interact with animals or have pets. There's a reason that we have a sense that we want to pet an animal, and part of that is comfort. And we know that by touching animals, it helps with comfort. So we're going to take this and try it on people who have chronic pain of different age groups, starting with the elderly. And finally, social media. Social media is a very large, it's a term for a very large group of technologies. It's any media for social interaction. Usually we can think of something like Skype. It's ubiquitously accessible, usually through the internet. It's scalable. We can use the internet, let's say, on our cell phones or home computers. And it enables communication in organizations, communities, and individuals when it works. We're using social media to deal with the issue of social isolation. So social isolation is a more objective sense of how isolated you are from others. Loneliness is very closely related. It's a more subjective sense. And it's not just that people who have chronic pain become socially isolated and lonely, but it's being socially isolated is very important because it's correlated to earlier death rates, or it's called morbidity. Studies show that people's immune systems are more compromised. They don't live as long. So it's not just something that we can say, so what about? When we start working on technologies, we start from the problem, we call it, and the problem here is social isolation. And we talk to many people before we even start designing something. So in this case, we interviewed people, what we call in academia human subjects, who are 60 years old or older, who have chronic pain. And we asked them how they communicate with their friends and loved ones, and sometimes colleagues or coworkers. And we developed, one of the prototypes is shown here. It's like one of those digital picture frames you see, except what's sitting behind it is sophisticated technology that is super simple to use. So technologies that seem incredibly easy to use are actually very difficult to design. What happens is the older person has a photo and they touch the face of one of their loved ones or friends, and a message is transmitted to, say, one of the family members saying, I'm thinking of you, or in some cases, you know, I need you to call me now, I'm having a crisis or a hard time, come help. The message is received by family members through mobile text messages or email. So here's where the idea that the way people who are represented in the pictures want to communicate is the way that they will be communicated with. So a video message is recorded by a family member if that's the way they choose to communicate, and that message is sent back to the picture frame, and the picture frame glows, and that glow tells the user that there's a response, so they can play that video or see a picture or get a phone call or get email. Our studies with people who are 60 and older were interesting because we had quite a high response rate where many friends and family said, oh, you know, don't complain, it's just part of aging, everyone gets aches and pains. And so the real severity and problem of chronic pain seemed to be swept into the bin of, well, that's just part of aging. So you might be asking, we're developing social media to combat social isolation, why not just use something out there like Skype? And that's a good question. But I think it's too complicated. And when I say that, I have to confess I have a certain bias because I worked at Apple Computer in the 80s. And, you know, when, for example, in my own case, when I'm having a really bad chronic pain day, I'm curled up in a fetal position and there's no way I'm going to get to a computer, log into Skype, hope that it works, see why it's not, what's conflicting with it, and that sort of thing. So we really struggle to design technologies that are easy to use in cases like that. We collaborate with Dr. Ron Becker at the University of Toronto, and his lab is called Technologies for Aging Gracefully, and he also designs technologies for people who have early onset dementia and cognitive problems. So it needs to be very easy to use. And I think Skype, as good as it is, isn't designed to meet the specific needs of people who have chronic pain. And let me give you an example of that. So we learned this. There's some, we went through all the literature of as many disciplines as we could find. And there's a bit of information about this, but it's not widespread. We call it an identity negotiation. And what we mean by that is revealing or not revealing that you have chronic pain has consequences. And people who have chronic pain have generally told us that they spend a lot of time figuring out whether they should tell people or not and in what circumstances. Some of the ways people have told us they negotiate this is they, for example, use a cane when they take public transportation, not because they need to use a cane, but because when they're young and when they sit at a disability seat on the bus, people give them a hard time because they don't look like they have a problem. They don't look like they're disabled. So that's just one of a really fascinating complexity of identity negotiation we found. Two is the sheer number of work hours it takes just to deal with chronic pain, just to go to all the appointments, just to deal with all the medications, all the changes in lifestyle, the exercise and the meditation and everything you could possibly do. And that it's additional work at a time when you have less and less time because you're in pain. And that becomes very difficult then to try to use a somewhat complicated technology, or one that isn't bulletproof in any case. And finally, needs vary according to pain levels. So in the book, The Pain Chronicles, the author of that book relates a story where one night she has made plans with her friend to see a movie, but her pain was not at a good point that day, and so she called her friend, and her friend said, oh, that's okay, I understand. We don't have to go to a movie tonight. We'll do it some other time. If you have that repeated over and over, sometimes your friends might stop calling, might not think of you as often. But what the author of that book really said and pointed out was that there are these in-between things that, if creative, people can figure out ways to creatively deal with it. So in this case, instead of going to the movie, she wanted her friend to come over with a video that they could just watch on her television. That way she wouldn't have to get out of her pajamas and go somewhere, yet she could still socialize with her friend at her house. So the reason I use that example is that our needs aren't just one kind of need. Sometimes we want to communicate with people over the phone, maybe over, video phone or Skype, maybe face-to-face, sometimes in real time, sometimes, later. And so we take all of those differing needs into account in a way that Skype doesn't, but could, but doesn't yet.
Hey, Diane. Could you
Sure.
say the name of the book again that you were talking about just now?
The Pain Chronicles.
Pain Chronicles. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So to reiterate, the three technologies I discussed were immersive virtual reality, or VR, robotics, and social media. And these are just three examples. We're working on many more and different kinds of technologies. And our question is, how do we develop technologies that help users focus inward? That's a difficult design problem because most of us trained in technology or media, filmmakers or interaction designers, usually look at bringing a focus outward, and we look at information, but we don't design the world so that it helps us pay attention to our inner states. And if you'd like to be a test subject, please email us. We're all age friendly, so it doesn't matter how old you are. We have different tests we need to do. And I'd like to thank you so much for attending, and please ask questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Diane. There have been a few questions. Anne, do you have some you want to hit on?
Yeah. Okay, I've sort of got a few in categories. There was quite a bit of interest in the whole identity negotiation. Could you discuss any more about that and stigma around chronic pain?
Sure. Like I said, we looked at as much of the literature as we could from different disciplines, and we found some in sociology and psychology, but there didn't seem to be a lot of studies that looked at that as closely as I found in books like The Pain Chronicles, where they're books written by people who have chronic pain. So I think this is an area that needs more study. And our respondents talked about stigmas, especially at work. That was the #1 focus, because they said most of their colleagues and coworkers and bosses thought that they were just faking it, or they were lazy, and even though they tried to help educate them that this is a disease and so forth, that really didn't help a lot, and in fact put them in kind of a category of any degenerative disease like multiple sclerosis, where when you tell your boss you have that, one's never sure of the outcome. Does that mean you're not going to get good projects that last many years because they can't count on you? Or, I mean, that's generally the way they respond. So that was a difficulty many people found. Another area that had a high response rate was in transportation, just getting around and negotiating the world. So many people, for example, would not drive or take public transportation during rush hour when they tend to get jostled around, or would have to wait in anxiety-provoking situations for a long time. And overall, those different kinds of situations, I could talk for hours, but I won't. What most people said is the difficulty was in that they had to make decisions whether they revealed that they had chronic pain or not, and then if they wanted to go further and help educate people about what chronic pain was or not, and that just because it was with one person, like a coworker, just telling that person whether they had chronic pain or not didn't stop the necessity, because different contexts, even with the same person, they'd have to think about, do I go on? Do I tell them how bad it really is? Do I tell them that it affects me this way or that way? So they said that the difficulty was, even when they did tell people that didn't help, they still have to think about, do I reveal more or not? And
Yeah,
that each
that's
time they did, it was, there were consequences they had to think about.
mm-hmm. Yeah, just in terms of the question that came up earlier about how people communicate with those closest to them, there were a couple of responses. One was that the person tries to keep others educated, but with a happy disposition and easy examples. And like you were just saying, somebody else said the reason the person closest does not understand the pain is that my partner is very sensitive and worries, so I don't want to stress him too much. I keep it to myself as much as possible, so that seems to reinforce what you're talking about there. Now, I guess there's been a number of people who have said they were interested in the idea of being subjects, so if you have any contact information about how they, is it just through your email that they would contact you about that?
Yes, I can I give you a phone number that we can put up on the website later?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, okay. And a few others here. Are there currently any virtual reality programs with the needed peripherals that are available for home use? Or is it really only through these hospital-based programs?
It's only through hospitals and clinics now. Mm-hmm. When we first started working on this about 10 years ago, we developed a system called the meditation chamber that is available in the States, but we've since designed much more robust systems that we're hoping we can release in, I'm not sure how long it would take, but it would become more available in the next year in doctors' offices and clinics, and then depending on interest thereafter in more places than that. When I was working at the University of Washington in Seattle, I was working in a lab called the Human Interface Technology Lab, or the HIT Lab, and we had a van that we had virtual reality systems in, and we would drive all across the country and into Canada and back with this van, and we called it the VR RV. So I'm hoping that I can replicate something like that for the places that aren't in major urban centers.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a big thing. One of the interesting questions to ponder is that if more people have chronic pain than cancer, why is it not being more at the forefront of public's attention, and I guess professional attention as well?
Right. That's an interesting question that I try to answer every day. Mm-hmm. What I found was both interesting and maybe shocking was that, I know so many pain physicians who are just overwhelmed with patients, yet they spend so much time and effort trying to deal with the government and with different healthcare programs and so forth to get us more care and more funding for research. And, they get at the end of their rope sometimes because they try so hard when they're overwhelmed themselves. And so they say to many of us in pain support groups, well, what would be helpful is if you form something like ACT UP, which was a kind of movement to get AIDS research funding. But I can't see people in chronic pain going to demonstrations and standing out in the rain or the snow across Canada. but I think there are other ways that we can help too. But I think that the answer to that question is that the reason it's not more visible perhaps is because it's fairly new. It was only named after World War II, which in the history of diseases isn't that long ago. We don't know what causes it. We don't know what the cures are. And even though that's true for other diseases, I think because it's a long kind of slowly degenerative disease, that doesn't help either. So many factors coalesce together. And my favorite story is that one of my colleagues helped in a research study that showed that veterinarians receive 3 times more training in pain management than human physicians. That was staggering.
Wow.
And I think, you know, even a study like that reported in newspapers across the country has to affect some sort of change. But at the end of the day, I think politicians and policymakers are the ones who really affect the way that this disease is treated and understood. Mm-hmm. And I hope they're out there listening.
Mm-hmm. Now, I guess related to that, if one wants to educate one's doctor around chronic pain, mm-hmm. Where would you direct medical professions?
I believe this may be, hold on just a minute, let me go to that slide. I believe on the Pain BC website, this might be up there now. It's called Treatment Options for Pain. In paper form, it's about 11 pages, and each one of these sections has a couple pages. But really, we started assembling this information for patients to bring to their doctors, their family physicians, because family physicians really aren't aware of chronic pain mm-hmm. in the numbers that we need them to be.
Diane, they do have it up on their website, so great. I'll post a link on our blog post, but I'll also put one through the questions box to everyone.
Great.
Now, this, I guess we have time for a few more questions. One person asked that their doctor suggested that meditation and imagery is most helpful to use when not in pain, but this person's been attempting to blur the boundaries around the pain when it's at its worst.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on this?
So I'm sorry, the person...
Well, the doctor is suggesting that meditation and imagery tools are best when not in pain, to use when not in pain.
Right.
But she's thinking that, or he, I'm not sure, is thinking that it's trying to use them to kind of blur those boundaries.
No, I think that's a good direction personally, and that's, you know, one of the motivations behind the virtual reality work is, you know, when I said for me when I try to meditate, the pain I've managed to put in the back of my attention comes forward and screams. That might be why the physician's saying it's more helpful when one's not in pain, because of having to overcome that mm-hmm. problem. But with practice, I think you become aware of the fact that after a while it's not going to be screaming in your face, and it will actually help. And so I would, you know, with that person, I meditate and use imagery and visualization when actually I'm in crisis too. Mm-hmm. It all depends what's best for people. You know, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I just picked up when you were doing your presentation was that you mentioned something would be up on TED Active. Now,
Yes.
could you just say a bit more about what that is? Or?
Sure. TED, the capital letters TED, if you do a Google search on those, there's some really interesting talks. I think TED stands for Technology, Education, and Design.
Design, yeah.
Yep. And what TED does, it's an organization that gets together researchers and thinkers of many different stripes, and they have really interesting and engaging talks that they videotape and then they stream online. They also have, TED Active is an affiliated group who actually gets the technologies that these people are talking about together so people can experience them. It's going to take place in San Diego this spring.
I hadn't heard of that.
It travels around.
Uh-huh. And there may be some questions that we're not able to get out. We're trying to sort of pick some from different categories. But just with regard to the robots, have any tests been done using real animals rather than the...
Yes, especially in nursing homes, especially regarding social isolation. We chose robots because of the accessibility issues, and also trying to get ethics approval with animals is a difficulty too. There's lots of issues around that. I would prefer, of course, to have a real animal, but when that can't happen, we design robots. So yes, there are studies. They're not specifically about chronic pain, but they're about social isolation among the elderly. And they're very effective.
I would think so. I know what it's like having one in the office.
You're lucky.
It really helps. So I think we're close to our time. Do we have...
But I think that we're about there, yep. So let me just go ahead and close all our final issues here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We're really glad to have you all here. And thanks again as well to Diane. It was a wonderful presentation with some really, really interesting information about stuff that most of us probably don't know very much about. So it's
hopefully we'll get to try soon.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And just want to thank everybody. We will be posting as well a recording of this webinar on our website, and we will also be putting up some of the links that we've talked about, both TED Active as well as the information on the book that Diane discussed, all of that. And thank you very much. We also, just to put a plug in, our next webinar is actually going to be Pam Squire, who will be actually talking about this chronic pain toolkit. Or toolbox. So we're very excited to have her talking about that next week. She's going to walk us through all the different tools within it. So that will be wonderful.
She's a very dynamic speaker.
Oh, that's great. Very excited to have her. So that'll be next month, Thursday, November 17th. So you'll be getting an email about that in the future as well. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and I think we'll shut it down. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
And thank you, Diane.